All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Governor's Broadband Task Force. Just a reminder, next week is the start of spring for those of you who are looking at the weather forecast and wondering when that might come. It does officially come next week, even if it's not going to look like it. We have a full meeting agenda today with a lot of operational items, I guess I would say. And to get us kicked off, I'm going to turn things over to Jaron to do some housekeeping. Jaron.
Thank you, Chris. Great to see everyone again. Thank you for attending. As Chris mentioned, this is a convening of the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access, and today is Wednesday, March 15th of 2023. Just want to remind everyone that this is a public meeting that is being recorded. A meeting agenda is available on the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin events calendar and is also available on the task force webpage. In an effort to maintain audio quality, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. I would ask that any members of the public also be mindful of their audio and remain muted throughout the duration of the meeting, other than during the public comment period that will be immediately following this agenda item. So I'm going to go ahead and get some roll call started here. So if everyone could just let me know that they're here when I call their name, that would be great. Chris Meyer.
Here.
Biko Baker. Marta Bechtel. Brittany Beyer. Sal Carranza. Lori Collins.
Present.
Doug Cox. Angie Dickinson.
Good afternoon.
Emily Dittmar.
I'm here.
Celeste Flynn.
Here.
Chris Herjong. Justin Hebner.
Here.
Gail Hike.
Here.
Barbara Koldos.
Here.
State Senator Markline or staff. Jose Martinez. State Representative Mursaw or staff. Thought I saw them in here. State Representative Ratcliffe or staff.
Representative Ratcliffe here.
Thank you. State Senator Paff or staff. Rachel Shemlin.
Here.
Steve Schneider. Michelle Schuler.
Here.
Brett Shepner.
Here.
Jennifer Schilling. Chet Streeb.
Here.
Chad Young. And that is the end of my list. Were there any folks that may have joined late or that I might have missed? If you could let me know now, that would be great. Otherwise, I can make note of it in the participant list as well.
Sure. Kwame Barnes from Communication Workers of America.
Hi, Kwame.
Thank you. Hey, how you doing, Jerron?
All right. Chris, if it's okay, I will turn it right over into public comment.
Go ahead.
All right. Now is the time where we will allow for public comment. This is the sole opportunity for members of the public to make a comment during this meeting. Members of the public may soon unmute and make a public comment should they desire. I do ask that the public comment remain brief and also pertain to the subject of broadband access. For those that are joining online via Zoom, you may utilize the chat function as well to let us know that you would like to make a public comment. Otherwise, please feel free to open up your line and make a public comment. I will ask for public comment now. Second call for any public comment. And a last call for any public comment.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Sure, I can hear you. Is that Terry?
Terry, yes.
Please feel free.
I watched your last meeting in February. And I thought it was very informational. And then looking, and yesterday, was it yesterday, the day before, I went to the website and I went to the task force page and I see there was no agenda. So I called PSC and I don't know who they found, but I noticed today, this morning, right away, there was a agenda for March 15. So I must have got it through. I've been following Broadband for decades. And I have a lot of questions that I know I can't ask, but personally, I think the agenda today will be very helpful to a lot of people. So that's my comment.
Thank you for that public commentary. And I will just say those agendas are posted at least 24 hours in advance. We do our best to keep that task force webpage updated, but that isn't necessarily the official, so to speak, spot where those agendas get posted. But, I do make every effort to get that posted as soon as possible. So I'm glad that you found that, and I'm glad that you're here, and thank you for your public comment.
Thank you.
I would make just a last call for any public comment. And as a note, I will say that we do accept, the task force does accept written public comment on an ongoing basis. We have directions on how to do so on our task force webpage, along with other useful items like meeting agendas, recordings, and other updates. So I will hand it back to you, Chris, to lead us through the rest of our agenda.
All right, thank you, Jaron. And as promised this month, we've got the much anticipated training on open records laws. And so I'd like to introduce Cynthia Smith, who's the Chief Legal Counsel for the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin, who will be talking to us today about those public record laws and our training for that. Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you to the task force for having me. And more importantly, thank you for your continued service. For many of you and for those of you who are new to the task force, welcome. This is very important work that you all do. So I personally thank you, and thank you on behalf of all of commission staff as well. So today we're going to, and I know for many of you, especially those who are have been members on the task force previously, or who maybe as part of their full-time jobs work at a governmental unit, which is subject to the public records law. So I apologize if it's a repeat, but these are very important topics. And annually, all state staff are required to review their requirements under the public records law. So that's where I'm here today, to give you a refresher and certainly provide information to you and answer any questions. Next slide, Jaron. I let the expert drive. I'm a little challenged sometimes when it comes to doing it. So as many of you know, the legislature has really declared that transparency in all of our governmental functions are important. That's why, like today, this is a governmental unit and you are subject to the open meetings law, and your meetings are broadcast and open to the public. Similarly, the documents that are generated or circulated as part of your work on the task force are also subject to that transparency requirement. The public records law is sometimes called the sunshine law, and that means that it shines a sun on the work that we as those in the public sector do. So you should presume that the records that are the subject matter of your work here on this task force are presumed to be open and available to the public. There are some exceptions, but I think that is a safe assumption to continue to maintain. And for your work here, as I mentioned, because you are considered a subunit of government as created by the governor, you are subject to the laws just as if you are employed by the state or a municipality. Next slide. So I'm going to cover a few key points. And again, I know for many of you, these are refreshers, but we're going to talk about what is a public record. And I often like to say it's a lot easier to talk about what is not a public record than what is a public record, because it is a very broad and inclusive definition. We'll talk about what is a public records request. Sometimes you're not sure if it really is something that's subject to the public records law, or maybe it's more of an inquiry. We'll talk about your obligations under the public records law for your service here on this task force. And I'll try to give you some helpful tips, which will make compliance with the law a little easier for you and for me. I am the records custodian for the Public Service Commission, which means all of the public records requests go through me for the commission and those councils or task force or agents or other groups that are subject to the public records law. And finally, I'll make sure you know where to go in the event you have questions, and I'll open it up to questions. Certainly, if you have any questions as I move through each of the topics, please feel free to jump in and ask your question. I can't see the chat very well, so Jaren, if I can rely upon you, if you see a hand up to let me know, that would be great. Next slide, please. So what is a public record? As I said, I think you can presume pretty much, regardless of whether it's in paper or electronic or what device it may be on, if it involves the subject matter of your work here on the task force, it's likely going to be a public record. Examples of public records, and this again is whether it's in paper format or electronic format, memorandum, PowerPoints, meeting minutes, agenda, reports, spreadsheets, the dreaded emails that we all get so many day in and day out, text messages, those are also considered public records, videos, voicemails, and any chats, depending on what platform you're using, whether it's Teams or Zoom. The device upon which, or the email in which these records may come to, really doesn't dictate whether or not it's a public record. It is the content of that record. So if it involves the task force work, even if it comes to your private cell phone or your private email, those are still considered public records. Now, certainly purely personal things, your personal texts to maybe your children or what have you, those are not considered public records. But your text messages to one another or to Jaren or emails or other documents about your work here, whether they're on your home computer, your personal cell, those are going to be considered records. There are some limited exceptions, which I'll briefly cover. But again, safe to assume pretty much everything is going to be a public record. Next slide. As I said, it's oftentimes easier to say what isn't a record. Duplicate copies. The PSC maintains the official records of the task force, our meeting agenda, your minutes, etc. Those are maintained by the PSC. To the extent you also have a working file, either in paper or electronic, those duplicate copies are not considered records. So you may retain or dispose of those as you see fit, but we maintain the official copy. As I indicated, personal items, personal notes. Maybe you're like me and I like to jot down personal notes just to refresh my own recollection from one meeting to the next. As long as those notes are not circulated broadly and they are just really purely for your own personal notes, those notes are not considered public records and then can be disposed of once you are done with them. Drafts gets to be a stickier exception to the public, to the definition of a record. Purely drafts of, a meeting minute before it's approved, that may not be a record. But a lot of times I know here at the PSC, sometimes when we're going through drafts, maybe we send emails providing substantive comments, or we maybe put comments in the document. It could be that some of those comments may not be considered drafts. So I just caution you on drafts that is a stickier exception. And again, given the high presumption of transparency and access, we need to be careful with what truly are drafts and what are not drafts. We try to use a SharePoint. We recognize that this task force works on some collaborative documents, and that allows us to maintain copies of the various versions should we get a public records request and need to examine this draft question more fully. Other things that are not public records, there can be things that are covered by copyright or trademark. To the extent the task force maybe has in its possession journal articles or things like that, those may not be considered records under the public records law. Next slide, please. Before I move on to what is a public records request, any questions about what is or is not a record? No? Okay. So what is a public records request? Well, stated plainly, it is a request for records or documents. Those requests can be verbal, they can be in writing, and there's no magic words. They don't have to invoke the statutory citation for the public records law. They just need to make the request for records, and it can be made to me through the PSC's public records email, or to me via my state email, to Jaren, and to any of you. It can be made, as I said, via email, or maybe we run into someone on the street who knows you're on the task force and say, hey, I really would be interested in getting a copy of such and such report that the task force had produced. Sometimes it's difficult to ascertain whether something is a request for records or is it really more of an inquiry. For example, someone may ask you, so tell me what's going on about the task force. What's on the agenda this week? That is generally considered an inquiry. You could certainly respond and give them a copy of the agenda, but it would not necessarily be interpreted as a public records request. So for those stickier items, if in doubt, my general guidance to you is consider it a public records request and forward it on, and then we can make the final determination whether something is or is not a request. Next slide, please. So your obligations. First and foremost, to the extent it's not a duplicate or not notes, but it is maybe emails to other task force members or to and from Jaren, you need to retain those. And those must be retained for this task force for 5 years from the date of creation. The other obligation you have, because any one of you or any one of us as commission staff could be the recipient of a public records request, I ask that you notify me of a request, or notify Jaren, or notify both of us as soon as possible. The public records law requires that we respond as soon as practicable and without delay. So it is very important that we get a record request from you as soon as possible so that we can timely fulfill that as we're required to do. And also just a reminder, again, the public records law, the foundation is it presumes you have the records that need to be retained for that retention period. We aren't required under the public records law to hold something indefinitely. That is governed by the retention schedules that are applicable to those types of documents. The public records law also doesn't require us to create new documents, but to the extent we have it, it needs to be retained. And to the extent you get a request for it, we need to hear from you about that request as soon as possible. It may be that if we get a request, you may not know, because maybe the request came in to me. You may be contacted by me or one of my colleagues who help me on public records and indicating, hey, we've received a public records request and we are just gathering relevant information. Here's what the request is. Do you have any documents that may be responsive? Again, we'll do a fair amount of the legwork, but I need to cover the bases and make sure that I'm gathering all of the appropriate documents. So if and when, because of our obligation to respond as soon as practical, you get such a request to search your records, we ask that you give that a priority, and we can certainly assist in providing some tips as to how to search, and then if you do have records, how to get those records to us so that we can respond. And lastly, your obligations are to take trainings like this every year. And certainly, if you ever have any questions about your obligations under the public records law, please do not hesitate to ask questions. Next slide, please. So here are just some helpful tips that may help you comply with the public records law. First, because personal notes and working drafts and confidential information may not either be considered records or might be subject to an exception to the public records law, it's really important that you clearly label the documents. If they are your personal notes, I know many of us, though I'm probably a relic, I still, do have a little notebook that I tend to keep day-to-day notes and to-do lists on, but I also do take notes electronically. I always make sure that I label the top of any electronic notes because it's pretty clear when I see somebody's chicken scratch, I know that those are notes, right? But it becomes less clear if I'm seeing a very nicely typed document, whether or not that was something that really was just personal to the individual or in fact was distributed to others. So please label if you have personal notes and you take those electronically, properly labeling those. It's also good to have good file management habits. And I find it helpful to try to segregate records that are relevant to your work here from your task force versus other work or your other personal items that you may have, whether that's creating a separate inbox that you can drag your messages that are relevant to the task force into, whether it's creating separate files on whatever document management system or on your desktop so that you can segregate and easily access those records. You might find that to be helpful. I know in today's day and age when we have, personal cell phones, work cell phones, emails, Teams chats, Zoom chats, really try to minimize and stick to one platform if you can. It's fewer records to save and fewer platforms to have to search. If you are using multiple platforms, that's fine, but just be sure that you are saving those records. And you should not be using platforms that like Snapchat or things like that have an automatic destruct on them. You should be making sure that whatever platforms you're using, those messages are being maintained. I know a lot of people may have multiple different addresses, email addresses. Again, sticking to one email address that's your kind of official address for your task force work, even though it may be used for other things, is helpful. And then finally, because I may have to ask you to search your records, not only keeping them segregated will help, but also, maybe always just making sure if you're sending an email that you're putting, governor's task force on broadband, something that will make it easier for us to try to track down and put in key search terms should we get a public records request. I do get public records requests for much of the work that the commission does on broadband. I shouldn't jinx it. I haven't gotten specific requests because I think the task force does a really great job of putting information about their business and their work available on their website. But I do get public records requests, and so I appreciate your attention to your requirements. Next slide. As I said, many of you are very familiar with the public records law, but every now and then maybe a new question or concern comes up. Please know that I'm at your disposal to answer any questions you may have about your legal requirements. You can also talk to Jaron, he'll find me, but I've provided you my contact information as well. Any questions? No? Well, I think
I was gonna say, I'm not seeing any in the chat, so.
Okay. Well, again, I appreciate your attention and to this important matter. And again, thank you very much for all of your work. I will drop off and let you get back to your business. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Cindy. Jaron, anything to add to that before we move on?
No, I would just reiterate, yes, if there's questions, as Cindy said, get a hold of me, get a hold of Cindy, get a hold of both of us. We can help navigate that. So very important information, especially kind of within the context of us entering report writing mode. So thanks to Cindy, really appreciate that. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
All right, thanks, Jaron. Thank you, Cindy. Next up, we have a presentation by our own Gail Hike, who's the Community Development Broadband Outreach Specialist for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. That's a lot to put on a business card, Gail. She's going to be presenting today on the Connecting Aging Communities pilot, which I had the privilege of working with Gail on, oh boy, probably almost 5 years ago, Gail. Why don't you tell us about it?
All right. Well, thanks, Chris. I want to talk a little bit about connected aging communities, and Jaron's going to do my piloting today. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Connected Aging Communities was a pilot program that we started back in 2016. It was a 3-year actual project that we worked on, although the work continued after that. It was a project with UW Extension and with the Bader Foundation. Next slide, please. What we were taking a look at was creating connected aging communities that were going to look at developing collaborative environments to improve social infrastructures, to embrace and adopt technology advances, and work to ensure independent living by elderly residents within their communities. Next slide. Why were we taking a look at elderly communities and getting them online? Well, I don't think it's any surprise that our demographics, as you take a look at them, we're definitely growing older. The baby boomers are now coming of that age. And so we have a large population in this category who don't necessarily utilize technology or the internet. We know that utilization can improve health. There's good research that shows that being connected can help with health. Good utilization can also save money for the individuals and for society. And utilization can enable older people to stay independent longer and remain in their home. Next slide, please. As we took a look at that very first year, back in 2016, we spent a lot of time looking at best practices. And this was done through reviewing literature, doing interviews, doing focus groups. So we spent a lot of time looking in Wisconsin, looking across the country, and looking at international examples of getting seniors online. Some of the things that we found were digital literacy was probably the most common approach for reaching seniors. And those programs with a high degree of human support were the ones that were most successful. Seniors needed to see a cost benefit. If they were going to invest time and money, there better be a benefit to doing so. healthcare programs that were successful offered centered around specific health concerns. So there were a lot of programs out there for seniors that had specific health issues. Providing incentives, we found, encouraged participation. Healthcare institutions were more engaged in specific telehealth monitoring and treatment, and not necessarily strategies for self-monitoring. And programs generally had one purpose, and they weren't really looking at the community or a holistic approach. Next slide. So what we wanted to know was the research that we were finding through our interviews, through our reading, through all the research journals that we were reading, did it hold true for rural Wisconsin? So similar to what the PSC is engaging in right now as we take a look at digital equity and developing our digital equity plan, we conducted focus groups. Those focus groups, we held 7 of them. They were in north central Wisconsin. We had 75 different adults that participated in those groups. And we were using those to take a look at current usage, motivators, barriers. What were those things that were impacting seniors' involvement with broadband, utilizing the internet? We held these at housing facilities, group housing. We held them at nutrition sites. We held them at ADRC centers, senior centers, community halls, all different places to try to get folks to give us their reason for participating or not participating in the internet. So some of the things we learned were perception on the number of those utilizing, varied based on reporter's background. And so depending on who the reporter was, healthcare and benefit delivery systems, what we did find was those who were in a volunteer capacity working with an organization sometimes were more likely to participate. They used it for newsletters, communicating with their groups. Participation of seniors utilizing technology was higher in women than men. Adoption often is connected to the age spectrum. Those under 65 may have been exposed to it in the workforce, but we also found that the type of employment that they had really played a major role in the influence and their experience and how they were utilizing it later in life. So seniors were pretty much like bookends. You had the extreme users, the non-users, and everything in between is what we found. Entertainment was getting more popular, and seniors utilizing the internet for healthcare research, baking, and shopping. There we were still seeing a lot fewer numbers of folks participating. Next one, please. Some of the obstacles that we took a look at and we're hearing people telling us was just that general lack of knowledge. And that could be from everything from they didn't know how to utilize it, or they didn't even know what was possible. Fear was a major factor. And that, again, had a whole realm of possibilities on what they were afraid of. Anything from invasion of their privacy, scams, just fear of the new technology, all those things that are out there. Cost of devices. We're starting to talk more about cost and affordability, and we heard that a lot from seniors. Keeping up with technology and maintenance. It was one thing to get to know a piece of equipment, but then to have something fail and to figure out how do I fix it? How do I update it? That was a major concern. Access to the internet, whether it was at home or at a convenient public site, some folks just didn't have that. And lack of devices to accommodate physical limitations. That senior population, we were seeing a lot of those physical limitations that were maybe causing people not to utilize it, even those who had utilized it before, because they didn't know how to overcome their physical limitations. And some just simply had no desire. Motivating factor, number one motivating factor, no surprise, family and friends. They wanted to stay connected. Life-changing events was second. And I always, whenever I talk to groups, Chris, I always refer back to you, because I think about the example that you gave with a woman later in age who needed to go home or go to a healthcare facility. And if she felt that you were providing, she could do that. And what did she choose to do? Learn how to use it. And when the time came that she didn't need to be monitored anymore, she didn't want to give that piece of equipment up. And that really stuck with me. Sorry, I had to cut my camera. I was kind of glitching out on you there. So, but I think that's a real important thing for folks to take a look at. And cost benefit. Really, they needed to see how they were going to benefit and see some financial savings from participating. Also motivating factors, education, and just that allowing them to be independent, being able to do their healthcare, their shopping, they're doing those things that would allow them to be independent longer. Next one, please. Best way we found to reach and encourage seniors to adopt technology overall was high tech, high touch. They really needed some human contact to feel comfortable to learn how to utilize the internet. Utilizing locations where seniors felt comfortable going to, breakfast sites, churches, libraries, senior centers. Often we heard people say, well, they could just go to the tech college. Well, that's not really where that audience is most comfortable. So finding those comfortable places is important. Hands-on demonstrations from peers, family, youth are often less threatening. Incorporating training as part of healthcare. Provide low or free options for devices or services. And community organizations are a great way to reach seniors as they already have that trusted relationship. Next one, please. So what we did with that information after that first year was to create, we selected 2 communities to be our test pilots. They were kind of our what I like to say is our social experiment to build capacity and capability of the community to really take a look at this as a community issue to get seniors connected. Looking at building support, those social networks that are going to help seniors to live an independent and civically engaged life. Next one, please. In order to guide us through this process, we put together an advisory group, and you're going to recognize some of the folks. Chris served on that advisory group. This was the beginning of the second year when we were looking at selecting our pilots and walking them through the process. I think you'll notice, you can see Chad's head in the background there. Lori Collins served on our group. And we also had quite a few other folks that walked in and out, but folks we really wanted to concentrate on were senior resources. You'll see Sam Wilson there from AARP. We had economic development as part of that, healthcare, technology providers, policymakers, Marianne Lippert, you'll see, who is with the governor's office at one point there. So all of those folks help kind of guide our process and help to, they really acted as resources to our 2 communities we selected. Next one, please. what we did over the 2-year period was to really help communities take a look, do some community planning. We utilize Cotter's framework for change. Some of you who've been involved with our broadband boot camp will recognize we use this for communities developing broadband, but we also were utilizing it for communities looking at making themselves aging friendly when it came to technology. So we assisted, did work with those communities, help them through the process, developing teams, creating a vision, making a plan, and following through on that plan. Next slide, please. Manitowish Waters was our first community, small community in northern Wisconsin in Vilas County. Next one, please. The local champion there, I always talk about local champions. You really need to have a local champion. The local champion here was the town of Manitowish Waters. John, their chair of the town board, was really instrumental in putting forth their town as an applicant and really working to facilitate to make sure things happened. They had a local team put together of their elected officials, chamber members, schools, the school district, Lions Club volunteers, and they had someone from a local computer business. Their 3 targets that they were working on were connecting with schools, community learning, and business interaction. Next one. This is kind of their map of their partnership wheel. We went through and developed a wheel and took a look at who would have contact or touch points, and they identified folks in their community. We did this in the beginning of the process and then at the end to really evaluate how much they were engaged. The ones with the green stars are those who were highly engaged in their process. You can see from the map, the library staff, the school district, and one of the local businesses was highly engaged. Next one. Their program really had 3 different components they were looking at. Coffee and Connections was, they had a major kickoff event that was sponsored by the team. Local middle school staff and students provided the lessons and hands-on activities with the public that came to participate. They used that as a kickoff to advertise their hosted digital skills sessions that were going to be held at the school, where their instructors provided the lesson, a mini lesson, and then the students assisted by serving as mentors to the seniors participating. They also then moved to community learning. Community learning sessions were hosted by the library. They had a fantastic librarian there who organized a lot of this. And she would pull together support from other community members, health and human services, school staff, community business leaders, to talk a little bit about different programs that folks could connect to using the internet, do some demonstrations, and then they would have some hands-on learning. Their other activity that they tried to incorporate was business interaction. They did do outreach to healthcare and financial institutions and grocery stores, although that engagement really never materialized. And they just found they were too small and too far away from the key locations to get the businesses really active at that time. Next one. Price County was our second pilot. They operated countywide. Next one. The local champion here was Flambeau Hospital. They were the applicant and served as kind of the facilitator and local champion to pull folks together. Their team consisted of a lot of healthcare professionals from the hospital, home care, and the clinic. the technical college, internet service providers, public schools, libraries, Aging and Disability Resource Center, and community volunteers. Their major target was social interaction, helping folks be financially connected to financial institutions and healthcare. Next one. Here's their partnership wheel. You can see from all the green stars that most of their partnership was in that school library services area. And they had participants that were from the general public and some folks in healthcare participating. Next. Their programs, they looked at Learn to Connect, and that was kind of their tagline for all their digital skills lessons. They started with lessons developed by the technical college. Their instructor there created 4 little mini lessons that she would do, and then students from the different schools would act as tutors or mentors. We started with the Phillips School District. They provided breakfast, transportation if folks needed it, and then access to their computer labs. The Shawamigan District theirs was hosted by the library and technology staff, and their honor society students are served as mentors. And they structured theirs around senior swim, open swim. So folks would come and swim, and then they'd go to computer class. And each week their numbers grew. They would have sometimes 20 plus people coming to their class just because they were at swimming and heard that their neighbor was going, so they decided to go along too. After Phillips and Shawamigan did their classes for a semester, Prentice decided they wanted to jump on board and asked to participate. And so they were added to it, the program. We did not send the technical college there. Their instructors there from the school helped to build, taking sample lessons from the technical college. And their emphasis again was on digital skills, and they worked their programs around right before lunch. And the school then invited the seniors to come to the cafeteria, have lunch with the kids. They had open computer lab, and then also open their lab after hours. And then Butternut School the following year decided to join. They're actually in Ashland County, but their school district, the Shawamigan district, goes on both sides of Butternut, so they felt a need to join. And their classes were actually designed and taught by their students, and they were held before sporting events to try to get grandma and grandpa, who were already coming in, some computer skills on the way. And as schools were leaving out, we found that we needed some summer work, so the libraries were engaged, the 3 library systems there. You can see Park Falls, Phillips, and Ogama all participating. Park Falls really took a more community-based approach and brought in professionals from healthcare, banking, and some of the businesses to talk about online shopping, looking at your health portal, how to bank online, and then had folks there from those entities to help answer questions and troubleshoot with seniors. The library in Phillips did more of the content there on their own, and Ogama teamed up with Prentice School District and 4-H to offer tech tutors. Next. Challenges and lessons learned. Utilizing aging or seniors to promote actually hindered participation. I think we always think seniors are somewhat older than us, and that was no different than this audience. They didn't relate to the word senior or aging. both communities felt they started too big and really needed to narrow the scope because community change takes time. Volunteer burnout was real. It was key to find anchor institutions who found value in the effort to carry it forward after the pilot was done. Development of long lessons. At first, people thought they needed long lessons. They found that wasn't necessary and could actually be detrimental. The theme of the lesson was sometimes the hook. So if it was on healthcare or social media or shopping, that was kind of the hook to get folks in. But the lesson often lasted 10, 15 minutes. And then it was more about the mentor and the individualized learning. And it could be definitely related to the topic, but often seniors would come with something else they experienced trouble with during the week before. Winter brought challenges, traveling conditions. We were looking at rural communities. Isolation was an issue. And so icy roads were a problem. Phillips, their first session was during an ice storm and they still had 5 seniors show up. And that's when the superintendent decided they were going to send the school bus out as soon as they were done picking up kids. If you called ahead of time, the bus would come and pick you up, bring you to class and take you home when it was over. Snowbirds was also an issue with some of our volunteers as they left for the winter, and for some of the participants because they were gone during the winter and weren't available to take the classes. Business community lacked resources or sense of urgency to develop online services. Summer season brought challenges with engaging students as tutors, and both communities lost their local champion at the end of the pilot. They moved on to different occupations and jobs, and one even left the community completely. So it was important that they had a team there and some of those anchor institutions to carry on the work. Tutors reported gaining as much from the experience as participants. A lot of our programs dealt with youth populations. They really gained an appreciation of the community. They gained an appreciation of history. And some of them really had a chance to develop relationships with either grandparents or neighbors or other folks that they didn't get to spend a lot of time with otherwise. Our anchor institutions saw some increased community participation as a result. And one of the things that schools started to do was recognizing that seniors were a large component of their district, and many were facing referendums. They really thought it was important to bring seniors in and have them part of that learning community. So they were recognizing a benefit, and it did pay off for a number of our communities as well. And business community became aware of obstacles for consumers. I think that was really relevant and became apparent to our financial institutions and our healthcare providers when folks were saying they didn't understand the portals, they couldn't get on. It gave them insight as to things that they needed to change. Next. So getting towards the end here, critical human networks, I think, are our big thing. That high tech, high touch was really important. Having that trusted place for folks to go was critical. Some of the economic implications, if seniors are connected, they're the ones that are going to be growing demographics. So we need to make sure we're paying attention to that. Okay, let's keep going. Last slide. Some of the things we have here is continued efforts. The technical college expanded their digital skills labs and had free labs. Schools continued to often open computer labs. Libraries started providing more services on technology. The Over at Manitowish Waters, we're instituting tech ninjas. Business started to address community concerns. These are some of the places you can see that we expanded the information to. And then COVID came along, kind of halted some of the face-to-face and caused the business community, though, to make adjustments in services. So some of the things they were having difficulty doing with online shopping, things like that also became important to them. And so we saw some of those changes. Telehealth increased. Families started to rely more on that technology to stay connected. And community digital skills classes are starting to return in person. So with that, we're to the end. And if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Gail.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that was most eye-opening about that entire study when we went through it was the fact that so many online services are already available. And we're not just talking about shopping on Amazon, we're talking about buying your groceries at the local IGA in rural parts of northern Wisconsin already back in 2016 and 2017. And there were a number of services people could do as long as they had internet access. And I think everybody's heard me say repeatedly that nothing helped broadband demand grow during the pandemic more than church. And church really helped a lot of people reach out to get broadband service. And so we're glad to see that we're continuing. And I can't believe it's been 8 years since we did that work. So 7 years. My math isn't great on a Wednesday afternoon. Thank you again. Our next item is an update on technical assistance efforts. This will be presented by Kristen. Kristen.
I don't have a PowerPoint today, and this will be a relatively quick update. For those of you who have been following along on what is not likely to be the next Netflix blockbuster, but is our 3-part series of webinars on broadband BEAD access. And we've been through 2 of the 3 already. They have been very well attended, with between 130 and 150 participants at each. That's phenomenal. This is becoming a portal for our communities that are going to be participating in BEAD funding to connect with both the PSC and with Extension, so we can surround them and wrap them with kind of the services and support that they're going to need as they pursue that funding. Our next one is April 3rd, and I just dropped a link to our broadband page into the chat so that you have that for your records. This page will be where once we open registration, you'll be able to register, refer people to register. We are in very early talks of if there's a need, we'll extend this through May if there seems to be a need amongst our partners to do this. But at the moment, our plan was for 3, and we have 3 on the books. The webinars recordings are also posted on that broadband page with the link. So if you've missed that, or you have a partner or an organization you're working with or a community and you'd like them to get that information, please do share that with them. Second thing with that is we have talked in the past couple of months that our survey or census of county broadband efforts that Extension and PSC and UW River Falls are coordinating is in the final stages of prep. We anticipate in the next week or 2 that we will have a link that we're hoping our task force members will be willing to use to take a look at the survey before we launch it into the field and make sure that we've covered all of our bases and we don't have anything obvious that we're missing. UW River Falls is in the process of programming that right now, so we should have more of an update on that, and that should go out yet this month. Our tribal government survey will come along shortly after that. We're waiting to get this one out in the field and make sure we have enough time to work thoroughly with our tribal partners to make sure that the survey suits their needs and collects information in a way that's compatible with their style of doing things. Third thing is that we did receive the data from the willingness to pay and ability to pay survey that we've mentioned before. It was a statewide survey. We had about 757 responses out of 4,000 surveys that we mailed to a random sample of Wisconsin addresses. So it's not an unusually low response rate for a mailed out survey, but it's also not extraordinarily high. It's about a 17% response rate. We're in the process of analyzing that information, and an early analysis will go to Savannah, Georgia, with a team of our economists who are going for a conference there, where it'll be presented and looked over by economists from across the country before we bring it back to Wisconsin and finish the analysis and report on it. So that's coming soon. We're very excited about that. And then finally, fourth thing is that we are still working on filling out the roster for our counties that are going to be needing technical assistance but don't have an educator from the Community Development Institute. Right now, when counties are reaching out that don't have CDI educators embedded in them, Gail and I and Chris Stark are handling the inquiries. And it's been a manageable workload so far, but we're looking forward to getting the rest of our roster filled out for that. So that's all I have for an update now, unless anyone has any questions. Between Gail and I think we'll probably be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Kristen?
Kristen, I was wondering specifically about the county's roster that you mentioned. Is that something that's published on the broadband site that you shared?
We will, hopefully we will have, once we have that finished. Do you remember the map that I showed last month? And I did not think to bring it up on my computer today. It had names on it. We'll have that map completely filled out, along with information that how to contact each. So yes, that'll be on the broadband page and probably clearly circulated amongst our group, and then also in the hands of several of our other external partners who are going to be helping in the process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Kristen. Moving on, item number 6 is the annual task force report outline and timeline. And this is going to be presented by Jaron.
Thanks, Chris. I was just going to add on a little bit in addition to what Kristen had said. I know PSC has been very involved with a lot of those efforts as well. And I think Rory will be covering, at least at a high level, some of the kind of local planning efforts that our office has been very diligently working on. So we'll do that later on in the agenda. But for now, we're going to talk a little bit about the annual task force report outline and timeline. So as folks are hopefully aware, the annual report is due June 30th. Includes the current state of broadband in Wisconsin, as well as recommendations for policies and initiatives to really overcome challenges to statewide access, affordability, and adoption. You can see previous reports on our task force webpage. They're also on the SharePoint site that we will be talking about at the next agenda item. But we're really kind of at that point in the year where we're going to need a little bit of extra involvement from task force members, to help draft content, review content, comment and edit content, that sort of thing. So would really appreciate that kind of extra effort. I know folks are all busy, but this is a really important step and milestone and work product of this task force. So yeah, a lot of the work that we will be doing will actually be within these within these monthly meetings. But like I said, there likely will be some effort that will need to be put in outside of these regularly scheduled meetings. So appreciate that effort in advance. We've covered a lot this year, federal funding, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BEAD program, the Digital Equity Act programs. We hosted an in-person meeting in Wausau with the Wisconsin Digital Equity and Inclusion Stakeholder Group in Wausau. We looked at how providers are responding to increased funding. We looked at how communities are planning and responding to increased funding, training and education and workforce, that sort of thing, FCC mapping, impacts of broadband, benefits of broadband, connecting aging communities that Gail just covered. There's really been a lot that this task force has covered in less than a year. And that's a really long way of saying, we've got a great deal of good material that we can focus on for this year's report. So I'm going to share a draft report outline. You'll likely notice that it's similar to previous reports in a lot of senses. And I did send this around earlier today, but I will go ahead and do a screen share now of that report outline. So if you give me a second. All right. Zoom in a touch here. I believe folks can see that okay, but if not, please feel free to go ahead and stop me. So at a very high level, this is what the task force report, again, that's due at the end of June, will cover. I've got kind of a topic column and then an assignment column. So we will have a table of contents. PSC will cover kind of configuring that and navigating that. We'll have an executive summary that Chris thankfully has appreciatively has offered to write. We'll have an outline of task force members, and that'll be a point where we'll want to just make sure that everyone's title and affiliation or organization is accurate. So if you've been out to our webpage, you can go ahead and check how you're listed there. And if there's an issue, please feel free to let me know. We'll make sure to get that corrected on the report. Similar to last year's, we will have a letter from the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin Chair Vaughn, kind of sharing her vision for the commission and her vision personally. We'll also have a letter from Chris as task force chair. You'll probably remember in previous reports in 2021 and 2022, Brittany Beyer wrote a letter. We'll have an acknowledgement section, acknowledging all of the presenters that we've had over the duration of the better part of a year, all the help that, PSD staff has put in, Kristen for her facilitation efforts, all those sorts of things. We'll make sure to acknowledge the folks that have helped us along the way. We'll have a section on our task force process and methodology, kind of how we met, how we worked, that sort of thing. Again, that's a similar section to previous task force reports, and Kristen has graciously offered to help pen that section. Another thing that we're going to take a look at this year, or I would encourage task force members to think about, is reaffirming or reviewing those goals that were made in 2021 and 2022. So this is a little bit of an opportunity for task force members to think about those goals. I would encourage folks to check out the previous task force report in 2021 and 2022. Take a look at those, and that's something we'll likely take a look at our April meeting. But revisiting those goals and seeing if they're still applicable or if we want to update them, that sort of thing, is something that we might look to do. We'll have a section on the current state of broadband access, updated from last year, some figures as to how many Wisconsinites, how many locations, households and businesses have access to, say, 25 by 3 service, 100 by 20 service, kind of some of those common benchmarks. You'll see some maps of where broadband is and isn't and at what speeds, that sort of thing, to really kind of lay the groundwork of where Wisconsin currently lies in terms of current state of broadband access. And then, previous reports, we've actually kind of done a little bit of a time change, 2020 to 2021 kind of thing. So we'll probably look to do that again. PSC will be heading that up. As folks can imagine, we'll have a section on federal funding kind of on the horizon, or at this point, we're really entering it, whether that be the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the BEAD, or the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, Capital Projects Fund, Digital Equity Act. There's truly a significant investment being made at the federal level that really is of high interest to a lot of stakeholders across the state and across the nation. That we'll cover that and talk about some of those nuts and bolts of those programs within this report. PSC will cover that. Current state of digital equity. So similar to kind of current state of broadband access, current state of digital equity is another key component to that, focusing on things like affordability, device access, adoption, you name it, that sort of thing is a really key part of this report as well. PSC will be focusing on that. We'll give a progress updates on some of the recommendations from past reports. So as you'll remember, the task force had a significant amount of recommendations in that initial report in 2021, a pretty sizable amount of recommendations, in 2022, and likely to have a number of recommendations this year. So we'll take a look at past recommendations that we've seen meaningful progress on, and then provide an update on that, just to really, one, to kind of show the progress that is being made as a result of this group, but two, to really kind of share that good news and let folks know. Then we'll kind of get really into a lot of the substance of the report, those task force recommendations and some of those case studies to exemplify those recommendations. So this will be another section that we will, I think, heavily lean on task force members to help draft and finalize those recommendations. I mentioned when I started speaking, there was a lot that we have covered this year, and a lot of those recommendations or a lot of potential recommendations could be pulled out of a lot of those discussions that we've had along the year. And, I've been kind of sharing this along the way, but continuing to get those case studies. So if folks have anything in mind, please do feel feel free to reach out, let me know, and we can kind of put a a bookmark for a potential case study. And then we'll wrap it up with a conclusion and an appendix for any kind of relevant materials in the appendix section. And again, PSC will be heading that up. I'm going to scroll back up and take a pause. Are there any questions on this outline table of contents at the moment? Does it make sense to folks? Do you have questions? Do you have comments? I'll just open it up.
Any questions for Jaren?
Hearing none, I'm going to briefly stop sharing and then pivot over to kind of the timeline, the timeline that gets us to June 30th. So now that we've gotten through that table of contents, like I said, we'll get to that June 30th timeline. And if you give me a moment, I will share that one as well. Working off of one screen here, so sharing is a little tedious. All right, hopefully folks can see that okay. So this is structured similarly to the outline that we just looked at, but this is, again, dates that get us to June 30th. So we have, of course, have a task force meeting today. That's March 15th. We will have another monthly meeting regularly scheduled on April 19th. And at that meeting, currently what we're thinking is to have some draft recommendations to look at. We'll talk maybe a bit about maybe the extension survey update. I know we just kind of touched on that, but if there's progress at that point, we might touch on that. And then we'll also, as I mentioned, review and discuss some of those report goals. Are they still applicable? Do we want to update them? That sort of thing. And then in terms of homework, we'll ask folks to kind of think about those recommendations and review those recommendations ahead of time, so we can really kind of come to the meeting with the pump primed, so to speak, and have a meaningful discussion about those recommendations. Then we go to May. We have another regularly scheduled May 17th. At that point, we would be looking to review and more so finalize those recommendations, review draft report content that PSC has been working on behind the scenes, some of those sections that I talked about, current state of broadband, federal funding, those sorts of things. And then also we'll ask ahead of time folks to rank or prioritize some of those recommendations that come out of that April meeting. So we can have a, depending on the number of recommendations we have, I think it's important to do some prioritizing. I know the recommendations all have their value, but I think it's important to do a little bit of prioritizing. So I think we would ask ahead of that meeting for task force members to do some ranking or prioritizing. Again, between kind of now and May 17th, so we can be prepared for that report content sharing at the May meeting. PSC will be working on content behind the scenes. We'll have those draft recommendations drafted and finalized by May 17th. Then we really kind of get more into the editing, reviewing sort of phase of things. So between May 17th and May 31st, that's a 2-week window. We were envisioning that task force members would have a draft document to look at, draft recommendations, at that point, finalized recommendations to look at. So you can look at it on the SharePoint site and provide comment, suggest edits, that sort of thing. Really, that 2-week window is the bulk of the time where we would envision task force members engaging with that comprehensive document and providing edits, providing comments, that sort of thing. Talk a little bit about SharePoint later. A little bit more behind the scenes things. Beginning of June, PSC working on graphic design, copy editing. We'll have another meeting June 21st, a task force meeting. At that point, fingers crossed, we will have a 98%, 99% report complete. Just kind of reviewing that report. We may, depending on kind of what's on the agenda, we may not need the full 2 hours there. Hard to say at this point, but at that point, that's really kind of what we're focusing on. Again, a little bit of a kind of more behind the scenes leadership review, kind of in that mid-June timeframe, and end of June, we'd be looking to doing final touches, final copy edit, and submitting that report to the governor's office and state legislature by June 30th of 2023. In past years, we've kind of had a little bit of a celebratory, short meeting, half an hour or so to kind of celebrate. So that's something we can talk a little bit more about. Is that July or a potential July meeting date? We've had guest speakers in 2021. We We had Governor Evers join us, and in 2022, I believe we had Chair Vaughn join us. So there's a lot of potential options to kind of, there's a lot of work that goes into this report. So a nice meeting, albeit a brief meeting, to really just kind of celebrate a bit and praise the achievements of this task force. So that is all for the timeline. Are there any questions on this timeline? Does it make sense to folks? Like I said, I'll talk about SharePoint next, but for the timeline, any questions?
Jared, I might just hop in and say, this is our tentative timeline, but this is a task force report of the task force. And so we love to hear from you members and have you involved at every step along the way. If you have feedback, ideas, content you think is important to highlight or things to pull in, this is as much your report as our report. And we type things and we organize them and we format them, but your voice is an important component too. So I know Jaron said it already, but I'll just emphasize, every step of the way here, please feel free to be included and get involved and share that and interact with us on this.
Hi, Rory, this is Sal Carranza. The recommendations, obviously, we're going to be reviewing that, maybe making some recommendations. How confidential will be that portion? Can we share some of those with our constituents so that they can give them some feedback? How do we manage this? I know we don't want it to get out there before we present it and have it approved, but I would like to be able to get some input from the constituents that we represent, right?
Yeah, Sal, I think that's a good question. I would probably just encourage you to use your best judgment. I think
Okay.
This is a task force that's public, so I don't think we need to be
Okay.
necessarily keeping things kind of under lock and key. But we probably wouldn't want to be sharing the full report ahead of that
Yeah.
June 30th deadline. We'd want to I don't know if there would be a press release or the governor might announce it, whatever it may be. We wouldn't want to get ahead of anything in that sense. But if there are potential ideas, recommendations that you think you could get some valuable insight or input from, I would say go for it and use your best judgment. I think that sounds totally reasonable.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank
Sal,
you.
I think there's an intent. Remind me, Jaron, I think it's next meeting. We're hoping to spend some time talking about these recommendations and having that conversation. So please, these are public meetings, Cindy talked to us all about public records. This is open and inclusive. And so if you want to have some conversations with folks you work with and stakeholders, and bring that to the table, we'd love to have that and share back with them kind of what we've talked about as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Rory.
Thanks, Sal.
Any other questions? All right, Jaron, are you ready to move on to the SharePoint orientation and walkthrough?
Sure. So we can hopefully move through this relatively quickly. Hopefully folks are a lot of the returning members are familiar with the SharePoint site, but the SharePoint site is really where members, staff interact with, comment on, suggest changes, et cetera, to kind of the report content. Hopefully everyone got an invite this morning. If you didn't, please let me know. I would say first check your spam folder. It's entirely possible that it went there. But if you still don't find it, please feel free to reach out to me and we can make sure to get that to you. But again, this is really kind of a key step in the process. It's really important that we have member engagement on this report. Kind of to Roy's point earlier, everyone's name is going to be included on this report. So we really want to kind of maximize every opportunity for member involvement along the way. So, but overall, SharePoint site, for those that aren't familiar, allows for file sharing as well as kind of multi-user access and editing to documents. We'll probably largely be working in Word documents, that sort of thing. But yeah, so I actually, before I get started I have a short PowerPoint. I will say that I will be sending out an email with written instructions following this, shortly after this meeting. So kind of keep an eye out for that, task force members, but I'm going to verbally and visually walk you through a lot of the SharePoint site at this point. So if you give me a minute, I will pull up a PowerPoint. Okay. So let's see. So hopefully, like I said, hopefully everyone did get that invite from, it would have came from an individual named Man Ma, who's on our IT staff. So hopefully that, I did try to put that into my email to prepare you, but this is what it may have looked like. And if you actually look at this email, this link right here that's kind of highlighted in red, that is the link that you would actually click to then try to access the SharePoint site. I was made aware from IT staff that folks also, whether they were external, possibly may have gotten something that looked like this. My hope and the intent was to have the message serve the same purpose, but in this case, clicking on that orange link would do the same thing, accessing that SharePoint site. So you either got something that looks like this or looks like that, hopefully. So you will need to create an account. For first-time access, you will need to create an account. I have a much more detailed handout or kind of documentation that I can share, but basically you'll either have to have a Microsoft account or an organizational account. And like I said, I'll be sending further instructions on account creation via email. My thought and intent and hope is that returning members who have previously accessed the SharePoint site and logged in successfully, you should be good to go. You shouldn't need to kind of go through this create an account effort if you've already done that, returning members. And kind of the biggest thing here is if you have questions, please email the address that you see on the screen. It's pschelpdesk@wisconsin.gov. And then also you can either send it directly to me as well or carbon copy myself, Jaron.mccullum@wisconsin.gov. So once you successfully create an account, and again, that's information that I'll be sharing via email because it's a lot easier to write it out than necessarily spell out or say every detail. This is what the SharePoint site will look like when you log in. So you'll notice along the left-hand side, the common link that I find myself clicking on is this documents link that again is circled in red here. Once you click on that, you'll go to kind of a folder structure similar to you would, in a Windows file explorer. We've got an archive section, and then you can go ahead and click on general. Again, that's highlighted in red here. That'll lead you to kind of a little bit further within the folder structure. I'm primarily focused on the report here, but you'll see that there's a meetings folder. You can see from 2022 and 2023, all the meeting agendas, recordings, any of those small group discussions that we had, those notes that we took, that sort of thing, any public comment that we've received in a written fashion, and then the report content you can actually within this subfolder called report. And I've also put copies of past task force reports out there as well. So when you actually click into a document after navigating the file structure that I just mentioned, this is something that you'll look like. It's kind of, at least if you open it in a web browser, this is what it will likely look like. So I would mention one thing to kind of be mindful of is whether this little button up here is highlighted as editing, reviewing, or viewing. So that's an important distinction. Editing is exactly what it sounds like, making edits directly into the document. Reviewing is suggesting edits, providing comments, and just looking at the document. And then the viewing is simply just, as it sounds like, viewing the document. So along the way, there may be times where PSC staff might change that setting just in an effort to kind of keep things streamlined. So that'll be something that you'll have to be mindful of when actually kind of tapping in and looking at these documents and editing or reviewing these documents. So that's kind of that highlighted section that I had up there. So just keep that in mind, please. That's all I had. All right, go ahead and stop that. So I would just say, again, questions with creating an account or accessing the SharePoint site, reach out to pschelpdesk@wisconsin.gov. CC me, we can get you connected. I will be following up via email with written instructions. Obviously, this isn't the easiest thing to share verbally, so I'll write it all out for you and get it to everyone. Are there any questions or concerns with what I covered thus far on the SharePoint site? I'm hearing none, and I'm taking that as a good thing because I was a little fearful that I was going to get a handful of people saying, "Oh, I didn't get the invite." So That's good to hear. Well, maybe in an effort to kind of keep us moving along, I will turn it back to you, Chris, and move us through the rest of the agenda.
Sure, thank you. And for everyone's reference, that email this morning did go to my spam folder. Usually that's just something people say and you don't actually find it there, but I did actually find it in my spam folder. So check your
Okay.
spam.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point.
Moving on, we have the next two items are both updates from our team members at the PSC office. The first one is an update on Governor Evers' executive budget proposal by Alyssa. Alyssa.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. We're talking a lot. I'm going to try to talk a little fast. But what I am hoping to do for the task force members is help connect many of the wonderful recommendations that this task force has made in 2021 and 2022 to the governor's budget, and just point out where those recommendations actually sit and were in the proposed budget for task force members. These recommendations matter. They do, get put into budgets, and they do are considered. And so the first, I have 6 items that I'm going to talk about from Governor Evers' budget. And the first one is from the 2021 report. The task force recommended expanding broadband expansion grant funding. And so in Governor Evers' budget, the governor recommended providing a significant one-time investment of $750 million for the broadband expansion grant program, including the commission spending at least $75 annually on broadband grants. And so the task force recommended increased funding in that area, and it is in the governor's budget as increased funding again. And this is, I will say the last budget also had an increase in funding, but I just wanted to point out to task force members, again, that these recommendations connect back to things that happen. The next one is related to changes in the state grant program and some of the definitions related to unserved and underserved and grant eligibility. And this also connects to some of the task force recommendations around speed goals, where we're moving that unserved definition up to 100 by 20, which reflects some of the task force members' recommendations around where we're looking to get to as a state for speed. And so again, the governor's budget has sort of a reflection of what the task force was recommending as far as speed goals. What are some of the program structures and the ways to structure our grant programs to get to the task force goals? And so the broadband, some significant changes to the broadband expansion and the definitions of unserved and underserved as it relates to speed per the task force's recommendations. The next one is supporting municipal broadband. And this, again, the governor is recommending that municipalities would be able to apply directly for broadband grants. And this was also a task force recommendation from 2021 that there needed to be opportunities for municipalities, in particular municipalities that have unserved areas in them, to apply directly. And so that's another task force recommendation that sits within the governor's budget. The line extension program is a budget item. The governor recommended $3.5 million for line extensions. And this was from the task force's, again, 2021 report. Line extensions are for those folks where it's the long driveway, the end of the road that didn't connect it, the sort of individual that needs a one-off. And this was a task force recommendation, and it also sits within the governor's budget for a broadband line extension grant program specific to those kind of individual one-off households. We call them stragglers in our office, but there's probably a kinder term. But the one-offs, the long driveways that didn't get connected the first time. From both the 2021 report and the 2022 report, there's additional broadband customer protections, and these are making broadband protections on parity with telecommunications and cable customer protections. So right now, broadband does not have the same type of customer protections that you do for your telephone service or for your cable and video service. And this change would give DATCAP, the Department of Consumer, a position, and then would change the protections and add those protections to broadband. And finally, and this is again a recommendation from both reports, 2021 and 2022, the governor's budget modifies current universal service programs to include digital equity funding, digital equity, making it sort of an allowable program cost. And this was related to a number of task force recommendations for increasing digital equity programming across the state. This gives a funding source. And so just wanted task force members to see and hear from our office the ways that these recommendations do appear in policy and in budgets and things, and know that these recommendations and your work is important. And I tried to do 2 minutes and I did 3. I'm going to stop talking so we can listen to task force members. I'm going to pass it back to Chris. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Alyssa. Very efficient. Next, some broadband office updates from Rory.
Oh no, we are going to go talk at you just a little while longer. I'll be quick as well. You know, we have a lot of important stakeholders on this call. You all are really involved in a lot of the things we do. So I always like to take every opportunity to just give some updates on what we're up to, what's next, how things are going here at the broadband office. So I'll talk for a little bit, but again, if you have questions or we can explain stuff in more detail, please feel free to chime in and interrupt me at any time. So just a couple things going on with the broadband office these days. Of course, the fiscal year 2023 state broadband grant round is ongoing. We're kind of in our objection response period. I will drop in chat. Our mapping team has put a lot of work in and pulled together some cool mapping visualizations of where those projects are proposed and how they overlap with federal funds, other mapping and availability data. So I'll drop that in chat. It's a cool tool. We're also in the thick of reviewing digital equity outreach and BEAD workforce planning grant applications. And so those are going to be 2 big applications and components of our statewide digital equity plan and our BEAD 5-year plan. So another great opportunity where we're collecting and engaging with a lot of folks in this group and in other groups and kind of getting feedback and engagement. So stay tuned as we get closer. We're hoping to start having a conversation about making some awards with those as soon as we can here so that folks can get to work and start engaging with those communities. We're also blazing ahead with BEAD local planning grants. As a reminder, that one is focused on working through counties and tribes and regional economic development organizations to kind of build from the ground up at the local level, a really nice comprehensive statewide plan of broadband deployment and get kind of the needs and vision and plans and goals of all these different communities. So this is a big compliment to Jaron, Kristen, Gail all on this call, as well as a number of partners at UW Extension and WEDC. We have all 72 counties have opted in to participate, which I think is a real credit to the work and the conversation that we have here and also to the need for high-speed internet. So we have all 72 counties. We also have 5 neighboring tribes. So really, really great participation. And, we're now at the point where we're working to prepare some guidance out and get that out to participants so that they can get to a place where they can start doing their work. So the next step here for those folks is preparing budgets and proposed project activities and then kind of signing some paperwork with us so that we can get the money out the door and have you start working. We also are focusing a lot on the county and tribal survey. Kristen alluded to this. That'll be another opportunity to get feedback and learn from counties and tribes about what's going on, how things work in their communities. We've also prepared some cool mapping and data tools that are going to be sent out along with that, which will be another resource for folks who are doing planning. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a pilot and then kind of roll it out fully. And then last, but very not least, although it's amazing how perspective changes over time, we are also preparing for the next grant round. There's always another grant round. The Capital Projects Fund, which is a pot of federal funding, is something that's been awarded to the state of Wisconsin. And once our state grant round wraps up, we're hoping to open another grant round of maybe about $38 million in federal funding, maybe this summer, later in this year, and just another opportunity to get broadband infrastructure in the ground. So, always flagging for people. There's always more grants, there's always more opportunities. So start planning, having conversations with your communities, thinking about where there's need and preparing those projects, because it's, it seems like a long way from right now, but it's coming up soon. So that's another thing going on. Jaron, Chris, I could just keep talking, but I think, if anybody has any questions, happy to have that conversation either here or offline, just feel free to connect.
Thank you, Rory. That brings us up to discussion. There's a lot covered today. Jaren, did you have anything you wanted to add before we open it up for any discussion or questions on the meeting today?
Nope, I didn't. Thank you.
All right. So with everything that was discussed today, was there any discussion, comments, questions, confusion, excitement? That's a good one. I'm excited about some of those recommendations in the governor's budget. It's good to see some of the things we've discussed here making its way to an actual proposal. Everybody's depressed because they know their snow blowers got to run again at least one more time this year. I know I am. If there's no other discussion, we can move on to next steps. And Jaren, I think that is you.
Yeah. To wrap
I'm
up,
sorry,
just want-
Kristen. I'm sorry, Jaren. I see that Kristen was listed under the discussion. I just kind of ran right through it. Kristen, did you have anything with the discussion?
One Chris or the other, it all works. So, but I saw that Rachel and Sal both turned their video on. Did either of you have something that you wanted to share with discussion or questions?
I just wanted to share that the Department of Public Instruction is very excited about these planning efforts, especially the broadband local planning grants and digital equity work. And schools and libraries are excited to engage with their local groups and their task force planning groups and their counties with this work. So please be sure, if you're one of those, one of the people working on this, that you're reaching out to your schools and libraries and learning about what they're doing, and they have data that can help you with your planning as well.
I just wanted to make sure if we have any recommendations from constituents, I know we have the share point, but should we better just send them to you, Jaren, or Chris, either Chris, or put it on the SharePoint? I don't want to make a mess of things.
You know, I think that is, we're going to be kind of compiling some possible draft recommendations for next meeting. So if you have ideas, I think you could send those over to me or Chris or the both of us. And I think we can fold those in. Or, you know, you can also come prepared to discuss those at the task force meeting in April too. I think, you know, April will largely be a kind of a sandbox environment where we're really kind of working with these recommendations in a draft format, bouncing ideas off of each other, that sort of thing. So I think either of those options would be okay. If you want to put them on the SharePoint site too, you certainly could do that as well. I wouldn't discourage you from doing that, but if you're more comfortable sending them over via email, we can go that way.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, back to you, Chris.
All right. Sorry about that, Kristen. Next steps. Now it's your turn, Jaren. Sorry.
No worries. Thanks, Chris. Just want to say thank you to our presenters. Thank you, Cindy, for the public records training. Again, if you have any questions on that, any issues along the way, let Cindy and myself know. Thanks to Gail for that great Connecting Aging Communities pilot project. I thought that was really engaging about, you know, amongst a number of things, you know, meeting folks where they are, removing barriers. I really got kind of a kick out of the, you know, digital learning lessons and that sort of thing after, you know, Open Swim. I thought that was such a unique and, you know, thoughtful idea that really enjoyed that conversation from Gail. Again, task force report, we're really kind of entering that time. So wanted to encourage folks to engage along the way. We really want that involvement and that participation. Next meeting is April 19th, again, Wednesday, 2023 at 1 p.m. We'll send out an agenda in advance of that meeting. That's all I have for next steps, though. I should say, stay tuned for an email from me, task force members, on SharePoint instructions, kind of in a written fashion email. So thank you, though. Thank you for listening to me go on and on about these sorts of things. I think it's probably a little boring, but useful context to get us to where we need to go. So thank you. Chris, back to you.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for sitting through a lot of presentations today. I know there wasn't a lot of back and forth or discussion, and I even tried to cut the little discussion that Kristen had with us short. But next month will certainly be a little bit more engaging as we start to go through some of these action items. And again, feel free to send any information, questions to any of us here in the task force, and we'll do our best to make sure you get the answers. And with that, I didn't think we'd be saying this, but we can give you back about 15 minutes of your day this afternoon. So have a good afternoon, everyone. Enjoy the snow again.
Thank you all.
Very much.
Thanks
Have a
all.
nice weekend.
Thanks, everyone.